Hello everybody, it's Tara from Chaley's Couture Quilting, and today I want to talk about tension, that lovely tug of war that happens on your quilt top. It drives us crazy, but once we get a handle of it and can manage it, we're going to be fine. So when it comes to tension, when you know things are going wrong and you're looking at your quilt top as you're quilting it, you may notice that the top has a line like a railroad track or just like a straight line across. You may see some eyelashing or the bobbin color coming up into the top of your quilt, giving you that kind of loops on the top. And what that means is two things. One, your top tension is too tight, or two, your bobbin tension is too loose. When you are doing your bottom or back of your quilt, if you see loops, if you see a straight line even, because sometimes it's not loops, sometimes it's just this weird straight line that doesn't look like uniform stitches, then you have this happening. Either your bobbin is too tight or your top tension is too loose. So how do you fix it? Well, it's a different way for different machines, and different machines like different things. We all know that. I have been working on machines since I've been working on machines for years. I've started with vintage. I used to tear them all apart. I've kind of steered away from that lately because I've been more into the business now. But, you know, when I was first starting out, I would just strip those old vintage ones, clean them up, fix them, get them ready to go. I was known as the crazy sewing lady, not the crazy cat lady. I had 50 to 100 vintage machines that I restored and repainted, made nice for other people to take home. And a lot of people would just come and give them to me. Well, my husband said I'm not allowed to collect any more sewing machines, so he put a stop to that. So I'm done. But that way I learned tons about tension, because I was putting back tensioners back onto those machines and fixing them and making the tension perfect for people. So I learned a lot by trial and error, and that's probably what you're going to be doing too. Trial and error to get it to where you need it to be. Now, if you have a domestic machine that has like the top loading bobbin on them, they're, you know, similar to like I'm just going to name off some, like or like the Vikings, Sapphires, and Epics that have the top loading on there, and some Singers have the top loading on there. They already have their bobbin case embedded into the machine, and the Berninas, you really don't want to mess with their big bobbins either, because they got it all set just right. Yeah, I wouldn't mess with that. Let a professional take care of any kind of bobbin issues. But the first rule of thumb for those types of machines, or the electronic machines, and even some of those Singers that do have that takeout bobbin, you can play around with those a little bit. But first rule of thumb is, let's see on those domestic type if we can fix it by just doing the top tension. So you find your top tension on your machine, whether it be electronic tension or whether it be a dial tension or tension knob. And that's going to be what you adjust. You only need to worry about the bobbin on those machines. I really do not recommend you messing with the bobbin, because I've had to fix a ton of those and it's not fun. Okay, so just make sure for those types you're going to just mess with the top tension. And you can find it look in your manual for your machine, because there's a ton out there. I couldn't tell you exactly where it's at, because your machine is your machine and you'll know it better than I would. If you have that, if you're getting the loops on the top of your quilt, okay, or you're getting the line, like the they call them railroad tracks on your line. Okay, you get those on the top of your quilt. What you need to know is that your top tension is too tight on those domestic machines. You're going to need to loosen it. Okay, so go into your settings and find a way to level it down. And for those, I do it just a little bit at a time and see if it improves. And then if it's really not improving, I try bigger adjustments and see. And then when I look at my quilts practice sandwich, and I always have that piece of practice, I don't practice on my real quilt, and I see it's looking pretty good, then after I've adjusted it, then I know it's time to do my big one. So if the loop is up on top, okay, or like an eyelash or like a straight line, then you're going to need to loosen that top tension. But before you do all the loosening of the top tension, just make sure you threaded it correctly. Make sure it's all the way through, and if you know, don't automatically assume it's a tension problem. It could be that it's catching on something and pulling it where it shouldn't be, or it's not in the right, or you threaded it in the wrong thread guide thing. That happens too. Sometimes they put it in different places and you have to troubleshoot and they really threaded it wrong. So just check your manual, make sure you threaded it correctly, because even if you've been doing it for years, you know, you may have forgotten and put it on a different threader that was meant for like double spools or something. So just check it. If you're noticing on your quilt that the loops or the track is on the straight lines on the back of the quilt, the bottom of the quilt or the back of the quilt, then your tension on top is not tight enough. So you need to tighten the tension then for that problem on your domestics. So loops on the bottom means, oh boy, my top tension is really loose, so I need to tighten it. So you're going to tighten up that knob or tighten up the electronic setting on there. Okay, and that pretty much is what you would do for domestics. Now, people that have Sweet 16 type machines or baby lock tiaras, you would have a bobbin like this, like the M bobbin, and a lot of other machine styles have something like this. Viking Platinum 16s, those type of bobbins are pretty big. You insert them and take them out. What you want to do for these guys is the bobbins first. These are the ones you want to play around with. Get a really small screwdriver, like so. A lot of if it didn't come with it, you can find these like online pretty easily. Just like Amazon bobbin screwdriver, but it's a really thin, small thing. So take your M bobbin, and there's two. This is what, like when I'm training people, this is what happens. They get the screws mixed up. So the big screw, and I'll zoom in a little bit later, is the one that needs to be on the top when you're looking at it for this bobbin case. And I'm pretty sure most of them are the same, but you know, I could be proven wrong because all machines are different. They're different babies. So to put the top one, the big screw at the top, because the other screw, the little smaller one, is just the bolt to hold that tension thing in place. So you don't want to have that at the top. You don't want to adjust that. That keeps everything in a good place. I even do this for my featherweights. I'll, you know, adjust that bobbin every so often. All the vintage ones are really easy to adjust. Make sure the big one's on top. You're going to turn that screw left to loosen it and right to tighten it. And what is the best tension to have for your M bobbin? Well, there is a palm test, but I found out with the palm test there's a range of feelings. And the feelings you've got to kind of know that goes with your machine. So I don't like it to be so super smooth when it comes up that it just glides right out. I want it to have a little bit of a give to it, but still pass the palm test. You don't want to be able to lift up this completely like it's going into the air. That's too tight. So what you do is you have the opening face up on your palm, and then you take your thread and you pull it up. And when I'm pulling it up, I can actually feel like just a little bit of a tautness to it. And that's what my machine really likes, just that little bit of a give you know, like a little bit of taut give to it. I can loosen this now just a little bit, like not even it's not an eighth, it's like like a tiny increment. And then I can pull it up the same way and it will feel really, really loose, but it still came up in my hand. And I'm going to show you some videos near the end of the video of this that shows how I had changed the screw and it did the same test and it passed the test, because it can pass a test in both ways. But I like this to have a little bit of give, because that little bit of give is going to make sure that my top tension comes down a little bit more into the quilt sandwich, just to give it a little bit more pull. And then you're always going to want to adjust these depending on what kind of batting you're using, fabric you're using. If you're double batting, it changes all the time. So you definitely want to always do like a tester, either on a piece of scrap blanket or a quilt sandwich that you make, that you test it on to see how it looks. And you also want it or on the side of your long arm. So always test the feels with this, okay? But I like it to have a little bit of a give coming up. Now I also like to collect the bobbins. So this is for my 40 weight glide. And this is, I've set it, I don't use TOA, the TOA gauge thing. I just use that test I just showed you. And it works for me, and every color normally stays the same, except maybe some of the darker colors. I feel like I have to adjust it a little bit more. The darker thread is the weaker thread because they put a lot of dyes in it. So black thread is really dyed, it's the weakest thread. If you're ever gonna experiment with thread, they always say to like get the black thread and see how it works on your machine and stitches. So because that is the weakest one. So I find that I adjust it. And also when you're using dark thread, your eyes do a trick on you, and sometimes it looks like the tension's not looking great because it's on a lighter fabric, and you're looking at it like, oh my gosh, it looks terrible. It's like wobbly or something. I don't even know, because your eyes, it does a weird thing. So, how can I help you with that is get a black piece of fabric and stitch on it and see what it looks like. And you're like, wow, why does it look so good on that black fabric? But when I look on this tan fabric, it looks terrible. But it looks like great tension on the black fabric. So it's just an eye thing. So if you're in doubt about those darker threads, get a darker fabric on your sandwich, and that's gonna help your eyes determine if your tension is bad or not, okay? So I have a lot of bobbins because I use a lot of different thread in my business. And I don't like adjusting. If I have this adjusted for 40 weight, I don't want to mess with this bobbin screw constantly. I don't want to have to go, oh, okay, today I'm using 100 weight. Let me go ahead and mess this bobbin up for that. And then now next day I'm doing 40 weight. Well, you know, I like to get things done quickly. And yes, it was an investment at first, but it was worth it. It's worth the stress relief of not having to adjust it as much. So I like to just do tiny adjustments. So I have one for 100 weight thread, it's like micro quilter from Superior, 40 weight glide, and then I also have one in a box. I know this is my 50 weight Superior So Fine. So whatever you use, I mean, that's just what I do. I have one for each so that my life is a lot easier. And it was worth it. If you find after adjusting, everything looks good with how it feels in the bobbin, how it's looking on the top, but you're still getting these weird things happening with your stitches, it's just not showing you the right tension, you may want to check your check spring, which is inside these M bobbins, okay? It could be wearing, it could not be raising as much as it should, and you might not need to pry the little sides up that are in the middle below the shank there. I kind of bend them a little bit. Because it should give you, once you get it threaded in here, it should have just a little bit of a bounce to it. So if you see, you can hear it and see it bounce. So it should have just a little bit of a bounce to it. But these aren't meant to last forever. So change them out routinely, because that way then you'll never have to worry about this being the culprit of your problems. Because if you keep going, oh, I'm just going to keep going until it's nasty and worn, then you're going to start getting poor tension. So this little thing is so cheap, and you can just replace it for pennies basically, and then you're good to go with your tension. So that's just another thing that that I recommend. So when you're doing the tension for your mid arms, you always want to do the bobbin first. You always want to have that screw looking at the top, and you go left for loose, right for tight to get just small increments. And again, it's the same thing for tension. If you're seeing loops happening on the bottom, take this out first, kind of just check it, make sure it's not too tight, or it's not catching on something in the case that's pulling that top tension to the bottom, because you don't want loops on the bottom. You don't want this to be overly tight. So just do a check, and if it looks fine and it's coming out like I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit of tautness and it still stands in your palm, then it's good. It's good to go. And then you're going to want to crank and work with your top tension knob. So we are going to go over there and look at that next, okay? So I'm going to put that there. Okay, these types of knobs are common for vintage machines. They're common for mid-arm machines like the Sweet 16, and they're common for the long arm machines, of course. So they work pretty much the same way. If you want to go to factory standard, you need to make sure it's flush with your knob. Because you may have cranked it and maybe you were working so much on tension, you don't even know how to get back to your start spot. So the start spot is having this screw flush with the nut on this tension disc, on the tensioner. Sorry. You all want to make sure that it is threaded correctly and that you really got your thread into those tension discs as well. Okay, and it's going through the proper path for your. If all that's set and you've adjusted your bobbin, okay, and it's time to, and your stitch is still kind of looking weird, it's time to now adjust it. So with these guys, you crank these things. Unlike the bobbin previously, the bobbin was there for small adjustments. I mean, I would hardly move the screwdriver to get where I needed to have it. But with these guys, you crank. You just twist and go, okay? We're talking full cranks. If you're seeing thread on the top, this thing is too tight. Your bobbin's fine now. You did your practice sample. You're still seeing it on the top. This sucker is too tight. You need to crank it left to loosen it. And I would give it, if you're afraid to go a full dial, because I will crank it a dial, maybe two. Crank it at least every, if it's a clock, every 15 minutes, 15-minute intervals here, there, if you're really afraid. But to really see a difference, you got to crank it pretty, like a good round turn or so. And don't be nervous about cranking it, because I already told you how to get back to your normal self. You just have to be flush. You just have to crank it back until it's flush. Then the nut is flush with the screw thing there, okay? So don't be afraid to touch it. It wants to be messed with. So you crank it, test it out, see what it looks like. If it's getting better or if you need to do it more, okay? If you're having loops on the bottom, okay, and your bobbin is perfectly adjusted the way I just said, you're going to want to tighten her up. You're going to want to crank it right, righty-tighty. Crank it, crank it, crank it. And you'll be saying that a lot, righty-tighty. I always say it still. It just helps me out. So righty-tighty, crank it, test it, see what it looks like. Don't ever test on your quilt. If you got a long arm, make sure you have enough batting around here so that you can put like a little scrap here. And I love doing this because if you have like black fabric and lighter thread, or you put black over here and you're like, ooh, that looks so awful. What's going on? Is my tension off? Again, put that black fabric over here, test it out, and see how it looks. Okay? So that's my long spiel about the tension, and I hope it helps you. And I'm going to show you some videos of the bobbin up close and personal about how to adjust it. Have a wonderful day. Chaley's Couture Quilting. Like me on Facebook. Okay, I just adjusted it. I went looser than I wanted to go. Now, if this was my palm and I'm going up, this is just feeling way too loose for me. Yeah, it went on its side, and that's great, but it's just too loose. So I'll show you. Let me tighten it again. I'm going to tighten that big eye facing me on the top. Big eye facing me. I want to change that screw a little bit to the right. And you want to do tiny increments. Adjusted it now. And now I'm feeling it. I can feel it a lot better. And notice that it still went up. And if you can maybe rewind to see that when I had this. Come on. Sorry. When I did this, it went over just a little bit from what it was before. And it has a little bit more pull. I can feel a little bit more pull in it than it had done previously. So just making sure you face the big eye at the top before you do adjustments. Left is loose, right is tight. Okay. Any questions? Just let me know. Like me on Chaley's Couture Quilting on Facebook. And have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.